Look, the future of African philanthropy is bright. Look, I think inherently we've had slowdowns in the economies on the continent, particularly post-COVID, around the fact that, most African governments had overborrowed, interest rates had increased significantly. We had done quantitative easing and, we needed to pull back. Inflation's gone up significantly on the continent. The issues then became one in which we needed to reclaim lost territory. What I see is a situation where African philanthropists have stepped in, and I'm not saying that they can do everything, but they've stepped in and recognized that there has to be change. A lot less reliance on donor funding, particularly from governments in the global north. They have their own issues. What we need to do as African philanthropists, refocus attention, think through the ways in which we execute, understand that Pan-Africa across the continent is our territory, and we need to do things significantly better.
Hello and welcome to the APF Podcast. I am Ebisan Akisanya, a proud member of the African Philanthropy Forum community. And if you're new here, APF is a vibrant community of changemakers on the continent. This podcast series just brings together conversations where we talk about trends, impacts in the community of philanthropy. And today we have an exciting speaker and someone who isn't new to us in APF, someone who is a very important member of the APF community, our board chair, and we fondly call him Gio, Chairman Gbenga, many words, but more importantly is that he is a seasoned lawyer, very successful lawyer, co-founder of one of Nigeria's largest integrated law firms, but he's a philanthropist, and that's where the conversation will be focused on today. So, Mr. Oyebode, welcome, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Ebisan.
Yes, so
good to be here.
Great to have you. And Mr. Oyebode, your work, you're a very successful lawyer. You've, like I said earlier, you've co-founded one of the largest integrated law firms in Nigeria. But lately, in the last, your name is more synonymous and with philanthropy on the continent. Why the shift?
I won't say that there's been a shift. I think it's more that I'm focusing a bit more attention around philanthropy, around giving back, around the gaps in our societies and how we recover some of the lost ground. I come from the school of thought that says that where much to whom much has been given, much is expected. And my view is that I live on a continent that has significant gaps, not just around wealth and income distribution, but around poverty and ignorance and healthcare. And so I feel a need primarily to focus attention, but also to be the change agent that I've always asked for people to think of themselves as. And it's very rare on our continent for people to have a footprint, a network around the continent as a result of some of the things that they've done in the past. I've been able to sit on boards that are Pan-African, companies that operate across the continent. I've visited a lot of countries on the continent, and I feel that I'm able to use that network, that experience, essentially to drive change, refocus attention in a positive way, improve on the narrative that we have. And so philanthropy, I believe, comes naturally to those of us that are African. We do give back. We tend to give back all the time. If there's a concern, the concern is maybe we don't do it strategically enough. But it's one of the things that I would like to change about the way we give back.
Thank you. It's really interesting listening to you speak about something that's personal wealth, how you can use your personal wealth to pursue purpose. And I mean, I've followed some of the work you do, and I see that you're interested in foundational issues that affect Africa. So lead me to the next question, which is, there's been a lot of shift in African giving. And from where you sit, what are some of the biggest changes you've observed on the African development, and how high net worth individuals like yourself, are engaging?
Look, look, what are the shifts that I see? The shifts that I see actually have nothing to do with philanthropy, just have to do with, I think, wealth creation. I mean, I'll use Nigeria as a perfect example of a country where if you had money 20, let me say 40, 50 years ago, it was all very driven by relationships around governments. Only in the last 30 years have we created significant wealth outside government, where private sector individuals have made significant amounts of money from telecommunications, from oil and gas, from manufacturing. And I think invariably what has then happened is that people have taken a view. The view is, if you've done well on the continent, then the next step is to see how do you give back on the continent. And because of those gaps that I talk about, whether it's healthcare or education, recognition that those gaps exist, the recognition that actually we shouldn't leave the efforts to governments to change, to try and change. What then happens is that we private sector individuals who have benefited from growth in these societies need to give back. And again, I take the view, pick your sweet spot. Governments, we historically would think that governments would sort out infrastructural issues, sort out education. But invariably, we now know that that's not going to happen. And so I'm happy to see oligarchs on the continent focus attention on what can they change around them. They take a Pan-African view. Sometimes it's a footprint of the businesses that they operate, but that's not such a bad thing. The important thing is that they're willing, they're committed to change, to giving back, to investing in rural communities, and close the gaps that invariably we see.
And so, you what you're describing is leadership, leadership, and again, not necessarily from where you sit. You're saying, and what APF pushes, in this space, everyone has something to give back and to do.
Yes.
So it leads me to something that we're talking about now. Foreign aid is declining, and you've just described a situation where you and other people can come and close these gaps that exist. Do you really think that the high net worth individuals and philanthropists in Africa can close the gap?
So we use the word close the gap a bit loosely. I don't think we can. I don't think we're going to close the gap significantly such that there's no gap left.
But then we know that there's a huge gap in terms of development.
But I think look, what does the current situation, what does it prescribe for the continent? I think we're going to have to change how we intervene. Why? Because we cannot rely on governments outside the continent helping out all the time. I think invariably what I see is local philanthropists on the continent, governments that actually left primary responsibility to donors are going to have to recalibrate. And we're starting to see the beginnings of that. So is this an opportunity? It's a great opportunity. Should we let it go to waste? The answer is no. What do we need to do? We need to refocus attention in such a way that there is a coalition of forces who say to themselves that without foreign aid, without donations and sponsors in the global north, how are we able to get things going? You made the point around leadership. The leadership conundrum is one that we've had on the continent for as long as all of us know. Why do I think this is an opportunity for change? I think really what's going to happen is that philanthropists are just going to have to say on the continent, to say that they do need to do better. And when I say they need to do better, they need to redistribute resources better. And they need to refocus attention on where the gaps are. Are we going to close the gap totally? I don't think so. But are we going to do much better than we're doing today, recognizing that a reliance on donor funding is going to be reduced? The answer is yes.
And when you talk of reliance on donor funding, we're thinking of real solutions. And I know you're someone who is heavily invested in education. It's something you have a passion for. How can you rally people? Because education is foundational in Africa. So how do we rally around real solutions now to... Otherwise, we see a future if we don't address this education.
Look, I think part of the problem was that because there was a reliance on donor funding, because there was a reliance on giving from the global north, essentially what we ended up with is people left their primary responsibilities to others. If you don't have that source of funding, I think it's going to be high time that you recalibrate and you say, how else can we do this without funding that's coming from offshore? Look, in a world of AI, I liken the AI opportunities to the opportunities that we had when we closed the gap around telecommunications, where we went from 400,000 landlines in Nigeria to 150 million cell phones today. I liken those opportunities to an investment. AI for education is one that allows us to close the gap in a very, very quick way. And that's what I'm starting to see. I'm starting to see philanthropists on the continent dimensioning change very, very differently, closing the gap very differently. And governments, we're going to drag them kicking and screaming along the way. But I think that the leadership that we deserve, we're starting to see.
Yeah, but it's important to drag the government because you find that people complain. A lot of the work in philanthropy is around things that government should do.
Yes.
And which is why there's a huge gap in development.
Yes.
So do you see Africa's wealth has grown significantly over the past 2 decades, but we're not seeing an equal rise in large-scale strategic philanthropy? What do you think? Why do you think that is? And while you're thinking about that, what do you think it would take to not just encourage giving, but also inspire real leadership around, because we need to carry everybody along.
So it's a two-pronged way of dealing with it. As you said, my sweet spot is education. Why do I think it's important? I think it's important because most of the countries have become democracies. However, we still tend to vote. We still tend to vote around ethnicism and religion. Why do I think we need to educate our people? So that they can recognize change, not just for the sake of it, but for an objective around development. So education is opportunity. Across our continent, we still see that the gaps are getting wider. We need to close it. And I talk about gaps there in terms of educational achievement. The gaps in educational achievement are getting wider. There's a reason sometimes I give the Nigerian government, for instance, a little bit of wiggle room. Population growth. Population is going on in Nigeria, particularly 3% year on year. So we're going today from 220 million people to in 20 years, 400 million people. There's need to change the ways in which we will engage. There's a need to change the ways in which we'll execute. And we tend to think that population is a great thing. Having a big population, it's a burden. But we haven't started looking at the ways in which we'll engage around that. So my view, there's a lot to do. Education is a big change agent. I would encourage African philanthropists to let's focus on how we close the gap around education, how we invest significantly in AI, which is the engine of growth for the future. We don't want to come to AI late. we're already late in the game because things are moving, significantly faster than we tend to see it. But I still think that, there's a way in which we can change things.
So what do you think about the future of African philanthropy?
Look, the future of African philanthropy is bright. Look, I think inherently we've had slowdowns in the economies on the continent, particularly post-COVID, around the fact that, most African governments had overborrowed, interest rates had increased significantly. We had done quantitative easing and, we needed to pull back. Inflation's gone up significantly on the continent. The issues then became one in which we needed to reclaim lost territory. What I see is a situation where African philanthropists have stepped in, and I'm not saying that they can do everything, but they've stepped in and recognized that there has to be change. A lot less reliance on donor funding, particularly from governments in the global north. They have their own issues. What we need to do as African philanthropists, refocus attention, think through the ways in which we execute, understand that Pan-Africa across the continent is our territory and we need to do things significantly better, redimension the change that we want to see. My estimation is that when we come back and look, and by the way, that's what the African Philanthropy Forum is there for. We're there to assist, we're there to create platforms, we're there to encourage, we're there to, we create the necessary environments for donors, for stakeholders, for regulators, for governments, for people at the bottom of the pyramid to sit around the table and think through solutions, think strategically about, how do we intervene? We don't want to intervene in a scattergun approach where we're dealing with the problems after they've developed. We want to be strategic in how we engage around our local communities, but essentially by talking to communities and asking what they want, not prescribing solutions to them. So I think the future for philanthropy on the continent is bright.
I love how hopeful you sound, and and we know it's very hopeful. So if there's one thing you'd like to see change in your lifetime, what would that be?
Oh God! If there's one thing I'd like to see change, I want look. I think the problem on the continent is essentially around income inequality and education inequity. So if you ask me, what do I want to see on the continent? I want to see wealth creation, primarily. I want to see education be available to everybody. Because with that, I think you will see the change that we all deserve, holding leaders to account because we know better. And on the back of technological advancements, that will happen. So do I think that those changes will happen in my lifetime? My hope and prayer is that they do, and that they will happen sooner than later.
Thank you. And thank you for ending us on such a bright and hopeful note. We thank you for sharing your insights. And especially thank you for the work you do. I mean, we don't take it for granted. You're fondly regarded by most of us and anyone who's encountered you, your humility. And I think about, the baobab tree when I think about you, just silently, your roots run deep, and we know that those things would eventually yield lasting changes. Thank you again for sharing your time with us. Thank you.